Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on interactive strategies for improving music reading. I'm George Litterst, and I'm delighted to be here today with my colleague, Paul Sheftel. Good to see you, Paul, as always. Where do I find you today in cyberspace?
I am located in my New York City apartment in Manhattan on the Upper West Side
And,
near Zabar's.
and that'll probably be verified from time to time during this webinar by occasional siren or something that seems to always be taking place in New York City. I'm speaking to everybody from a little town of Rehoboth, Massachusetts, southern Massachusetts near Providence, Rhode Island, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Love to know who's joining us so far live. We've heard from a lot of people who have registered who cannot be here live, been looking forward to the replay, and we will send out an announcement to everybody who registered about that. But in the meanwhile, I see that Dean is here from East Tennessee, Larry Harms from Houston, and I'll just pause on that for just a moment and want to recognize Larry. Larry has been kind of a spiritual guide to all things MIDI and educational, having had quite an illustrious career at Roland for many years. And I know he got Paul very involved in creating MIDI sequences, and some of that material has come to life in a new dimension and we'll be showing you today in SuperScore. So thank you very much, Larry, for being here. And
I second that, Larry.
greetings to Unitan from Buenos Aires. Wow. And Marianne from Fairfax. We've got Adel from Mountain View, John from San Antonio, Colleen from Calgary, Rose from California, Sharon, another one from Calgary, and David from Ottawa. And I'm sure there are going to be some more coming in. So anyway, welcome everyone. I'll call your attention to the fact that there is both the Q&A window and, I'm sorry, the chat window, and there's separately a Q&A window. And if you have any questions in the course of the webinar, I recommend that you put them in the Q&A window because that'll be separated from the chat stuff. It's easier for me to glance at that and manage it, and when we've addressed a question that had come up, it gets dismissed from the list, and it's just a lot easier for us. And I will make a point at some point during the webinar of making sure any question that appears there will get answered. So, Paul, let's give everybody here a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about. It's interactive strategies and solutions for improving music reading. And the interactive part does suggest that you've got some technology helping out. And we're going to be using the iPad and an app, it's a free app called SuperScore, which my company, TimeWarp Technologies, has developed, along with a lot of content. The content we're going to be showing today is from Cyber Conservatory, largely compositions and collaborations with Paul Sheftel, myself, and even some others from Carl Fisher. But there's other content for SuperScore that's available also. The webinar is being sponsored by my software company, TimeWarp Technologies. I hope you'll visit us on the web. We are the producers of Classroom Maestro, an app that we will use a little bit here for points of musical illustration. It's for Mac and PC. Internet MIDI, which is an app that connects any two MIDI-equipped pianos or other instruments together over the internet. Home Concert Extreme, which is an interactive MIDI file player that responds to you as you play on your MIDI instrument. And SuperScore on the iPad, which you'll be seeing a lot of today. And to find us on the web, just go to timewarptech.com. And in addition to probing the menus that you see there in terms of the products and descriptions and so forth, I'd like to call your attention to the resources area, because if you go into the resources area for any of these products, including SuperScore, you'll see webinar replays, you'll find mini tutorials on things, and the webinar that we're doing today will end up over there in that section. I'd also like to bring your attention to the Cyber Conservatory website, cyberconservatory.com. And to switch my focus back over there, on this website, you'll be able to find descriptions of the various materials that we're going to be showing today. And at this early juncture in our presentation, I'll call your attention to the resources area, because we're going to be covering just an awful lot of different topics related to reading at a lot of different musical levels. And we'll be giving you examples from a variety of different publications. And if you want to get a sense for how all of these things relate to each other in terms of what are the focuses of these various publications, there's a nice chart here in the resources area that will clarify those things. I need to get my focus back over here. Okay. I'm managing a new presentation environment today, so it's taking me just a little moment to get my navigation fully here under control. So we're going to be looking at a whole variety of publications that serve multiple purposes, but which are in one way or another very effective in terms of developing reading processes. And if you find any of these materials to be of interest, I would invite you to send a request by email to my personal email address, pianobench@gmail.com, and I would be happy to give you a promo code for a free album in SuperScore. And Paul wanted you to know that if you just had any areas of piano education and reading that you'd like to discuss with him personally, after this webinar, you're invited to contact him at his address, which is psheftel@aol.com. Now, we did mention in our promotion for this webinar that a lot of the things that we are going to be talking about today are validated by neuroscience research. And we don't make the claim that either one of us is a neuroscientist, nor that we have done formalized neuroscience research, but over the decades of our teaching, we've both felt that as we continue to follow the research as it has evolved, that the things that we've come to find out are really work out well in piano education are validated by the research. And we want to call your attention to a couple of books that you might want to pursue on your own. The Art of Piano Playing, A Scientific Approach by George Kochavitsky was the first book that involved research that got my attention a number of decades ago. If you look for it on the web, you'll find that used copies are available here and there, but fortunately it's actually available from Amazon as a Kindle book, and it's a good one to have. It goes into all sorts of aspects of the brain and neurology as it applies to piano playing in general, but starting in about the middle area of the book, it does get into issues of reading explicitly. And I'd like to just give you one quote from this book that underlies a number of the things we're going to be talking about today. Kochavitsky stated, "We cannot read a row of nonsense syllables quickly because we're unable to unite these syllables into meaningful words and sentences." Well, think about that. That was certainly a true statement. Practice in repeating them would not be of much help. Only when grasping the sense of what we are reading can we read quickly. So he's talking about this concept that effective reading of any sort does involve a sense of understanding, relating groups of symbols together, and being able to attach meaning to them in the same way that we take letters of the alphabet, put them into words, words strung together become sentences which express thoughts and so forth. And it's a very same sort of thing with music reading, and that's a rather fundamental concept that we'll be talking about today. And this is a book that Paul brought to my attention. It's a much more recent one by Molly Jebrian, Learn Faster, Perform Better. Paul, what had gotten your attention about this book?
Well, I've been uh, eternally fascinated with the whole issue of learning and reading, and they're sort of two sides of the same coin, I think. Molly talks about uh, the brain function from the standpoint of learning and goes into enormous detail into strategies for practicing, like the number of repetitions that's valuable at a given moment, spacing them out. But it's all based on her. She is both a neuroscientist and a professional musician. So she brings those two disciplines into play. And it's just a marvelous, marvelous book with a lot of very practical, meaningful things. And as I say, she's mainly focusing on issues of learning, but the issue of reading is there are a lot of very great similarities when it comes to what we understand about brain function, and so I find this book extremely valuable. I recommend it to almost all of my adult students. I think you all would find that a very useful volume.
And the quote that we have here on the screen really underlies the whole idea here. Our bodies don't do anything without our brains. And if we reframe practicing as brain training, it can change how we approach things. So, we're going to be approaching this today from a number of points of view, and we're just going to give you a very quick overview of these areas, starting with motor autopilot. And
Let me just add one thought. This I fascinated with what AI might uh, suggest. I asked AI about neuroscience and music reading, and they came up with a lengthy and very extremely interesting uh, description of all of the work that's been done to understand brain function and reading. And these are the takeaways that they, after a rather lengthy exposition, they gave these takeaways. So this is the first one. Uh, so practicing patterns is key because it frees the brain from micro decisions. Uh, and we're going to be investigating this issue with our own materials in just a few moments.
yeah, and I think the important point here is this, when we talk about sight reading, there's usually the first thing in the discussion is this idea, well, you got to move your eyes ahead. And so you're prepared for what's about to happen. But what's often not talked about is the idea that we need to get away from doing moment by moment translations of what we're seeing into actions, and that if we can develop an underlying vocabulary, which in this case we're talking about a vocabulary of automatic finger responses, that's going to facilitate what we do.
Because you might very well ask, well, why do we practice scales? Why do we practice chords? And the answer is, as George just said, you build an infrastructure so you don't have to, when you're reading, you don't have to think about these things. They're already established and built in. Rhythm preview, same idea. And we have a lot of materials to develop rhythmic awareness that we're going to be going into.
And
Uh, Yeah, this is frequently a topic that is ignored. And the professional musician, of course, has developed the ability to look at a score and hear what's coming. But it's certainly, and certainly in France and Italy, and I think maybe most of Europe, the great deal of emphasis is placed on solfeggio, sight singing, and I don't know that we place the same emphasis on it in this country, and it certainly is important. This is so fundamental, the ability to see more than single notes, to be able to see structures, to take in as much information as possible. And we're going to be presenting a lot of material which has very, very clear structures which to engender uh, um, fluent sight reading.
I'll often take a passage of music that I've put in front of a student, let's say it's 16 measures long, and by asking my students leading questions, we'll analyze this and figure out how many hand positions or chords or whatever are involved. And often we'll find out that there are really only four things you need to think about in order to play this. But then add up how many notes there are in those 16 measures. You know, it could be 50, 80. um, and so reducing the large number of events to small groupings put.
Very often in a lesson, I will say, this piece looks really hard. It could take up to 3 minutes to figure it out because it turns out that the piece has maybe three issues. And if you cover those three issues in the lesson, you can be pretty sure the student will be ready to go home and practice it effectively.
Then, of course, to develop that skill of always being able to keep on going, moving forward. And this is a major area where the technology comes into play. If you have a lot of material that you've been able to work to provide for your students, and they can work on pieces with musical backing tracks, that gets.
Yeah, this is SuperScore to the rescue. This amazing tool for helping develop this particular. By the way, each one of these, according to our neuroscientists, excites a different part of the brain. So the other fascinating thing, and I point this out to my students frequently, that they keep telling us that music is a wonderful occupation for brain preservation and brain development. And you can see why, because you're multitasking, you're doing all of these things, and it's just the most marvelous exercise in helping keeping your brain young. I'm approaching 93, and I'm happy to report that many parts of my brain are still working. Many parts.
Many parts. And I'm hoping to have more parts by the time I get to 93 myself. Um, and then, of course, looking ahead is an important part of um, reading, but it's more than just looking at the next thing and quickly figuring it out ahead of time. Um, if you can anticipate what's about to happen by virtue of your understanding of the music, the melodic shapes, the chord progression, the style in which you're playing, the rhythmic patterns that have already been established, that ability to predict what's about to happen is a very important issue. So these are quite a number of different things that we're going to be getting into. And
So I was very thrilled when I looked at these items from our neuroscientist friends and discovered that we have an abundance of materials that are ideally suited to match each one of these issues. And that's what we're going into.
so we are going to switch over now to SuperScore. And we're going to go through a lot of different material. We're going to start actually at some very basic levels, and well, we'll just talk about them as we go along. Starting with a series that's not as well known today. It's the Music Pathways series. It's published by Carl Fisher, and levels A, B, C, and D have been licensed for sale in SuperScore, and we have the music in an interactive edition. And we're starting with the very first piece in the very first book. Paul, what's this all about?
Okay, so now this collection is the brainchild of three brilliant people: Marvin Blickenstaff, Lynn Olson, who was actually a very close friend of mine, and a marvelous musician and an extraordinary composer who understood pedagogy in a very unique way. And I was talking to Marvin, who is a very beloved friend, about this piece, and he said this piece illustrates everything you need to know about reading music, because the two fundamental elements in music are reading pitch and reading rhythm. And here you see it. Pitch is represented by high and low, and rhythm is represented by a code, a special code, and here you see it in a very elemental form with the black and the white symbols. So the light symbol being twice the length of the dark ones. So you could approach this, first of all, just as short, short, long, short, short, or possibly with an adult student. And by the way, I think because of the fact that originally this was just a text, but in the SuperScore version, everything, I've created backing tracks for everything, and it's a marvelous tool for working with adults who, because of the sophistication, I think, of the pedagogy and the sophistication, I humbly add, of my accompaniments, uh, I find adults find this very useful. So let's hear what this sounds like, George.
And I should just mention quickly that in this piece, they're directed on a previous page to use a cluster hand position, and they're playing chunks of keys on the keyboard going.
You could also just do it with this C or any note. C would work. So right at the very outset, you're making music, you're having a musical experience, and it's just amazing how the students pick up when their interest, their whole involvement picks up with the backing track. This is the last piece in level A, just to give you an idea of how far it gets. And you can see they're now reading from landmark C's intervallically uh, at this point. And you can see also that in terms of teaching, uh, uh, at this point, George, you might want to talk a little bit about Classroom Maestro and how you could just synthesize what needs to be covered.
Sure. Well, what I should emphasize here is that in this Music Pathways book, they do approach reading from a perspective of landmarks and intervals from these landmarks. And without getting involved too much in the detail of the methodology, I'll just point out that by the end of the book, you've learned to read where these C's are on the staff very, very well. And although it is a bit of a secondary item, the treble G and bass are emphasized. And I end up telling my students, well, the top space of the G clef is G, the bottom space of the F clef is F. And then when you add all the C's into that, you end up, by the end of the book, very quickly being able to identify most of the notes over a huge reading range. But then once you've placed your hands, you've learned to read by interval. So we should get back to our repertoire. Paul will play just a little bit of this beginning, and you'll notice that there are chunks of the piece that repeat over and over. And so,
And you've reviewed the notes. By the way, just a couple of comments about note identification. There is controversy in the pedagogy world about the importance uh, uh, of recognizing individual notes as opposed to recognizing intervals and patterns. And I'm a great believer in both. I think the emphasis on reading intervallically is terribly important, but I also think it's tremendously important little by little because it's very hard code to crack to learn to recognize notes quickly, but it's part of this whole continuum of being able to not have to think when you're sight reading about which note it is. You know it. It's a built-in response. I think of my inability to read fluently using an alto clef because I just haven't had that experience in life, and uh, and I realized that note from that experience how important note reading is, and this approach by starting with certain landmarks and gradually but continuously emphasizing note identification, I think is terribly important.
so this is an example of a piece from level B. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here about the technology is this, that based on your ability to discriminate between lines and spaces, where you are in the learning process, you very often will benefit from being able to view your notation in a large size. And so you can more clearly see what line or space a note is on. But the moment you need to talk about what is the structure of the piece, where are the patterns that get repeated, you need to be able to zoom out and have more of a macro view. And these are things that you can do very comfortably in SuperScore because we have a liquid music notation display that reformats itself on the fly as you're going.
And as you can see, the number of notes that they're reading now is extremely limited. So if you've looked at those notes on um, the on George's other app platform, uh, and just take like 1 minute. All the preparation that you need is, well, what are those notes and what are those rhythms? And right away, this fairly advanced looking piece is accessible at a very beginning, early level.
And you'd want to identify clearly that the hand position that you start with in the right hand gets duplicated, but in a different octave later on in the piece, and then, of course, moves back.
There's great ingenuity to the pedagogy of music pathways, and it makes the teaching very logical and very enormously helpful to the teacher too, because of the extremely and the music sounds better and better as it becomes more advanced. I think it's a pretty good example right here.
And this is one of the things that Lynn Freeman Olson has done so very cleverly as the development of two hands playing at the same time is taking place. You get a piece like this in which, well, actually, at any given moment until the very end, it's one hand at a time, but you have the effect of two hands being played together.
And don't forget the tremendous importance of tapping the rhythm as a separate thing. So, for example, the student could tap uh, and tap along with as you play it. You can take out the backing track and just hear the solo with the uh, metronome first, and maybe just do the tapping first. You work out the notes, and again, you can see there are just a few notes, but at this point, they're introducing accidentals. So it's all very, very carefully calculated, but the end result is very charming. Can we hear a little of this?
And the right hand had to play every note with the third finger. Uh, you are learning how to have the freedom of moving around the entire keyboard as you go through this method.
And you can see that these are both, we're talking about the learning of the pieces and the reading of the pieces. For example, a more advanced, for a beginning level student would be, perhaps this would be a little too advanced for sight reading, but for a more advanced student, it's a marvelous example for sight reading because of the focus and the limited amount of information.
That's right. But I will point out that even in this piece, Wink and Blink, and I'll just switch over to Classroom Maestro to illustrate, um, you could figure out that both of the hands are in an A major five finger pattern. And once that becomes clear, the um, the notes don't look like they're just flying in space, so to speak. That they're clustered into these recognized hand positions, and the understanding of the construction of a major pentascale, where the half steps and whole steps is something that's been developed up to this point. And we're going to see this idea of having the freedom of moving around the keyboard in these five finger patterns very clearly in this piece, Puppy Pranks. And by this time, a student should be able to look at the piece and recognize, oh, we've got this D major structure for the first two bars, G major, A major, etc. And all of a sudden, being able to play it becomes a lot easier. So if I just were to mark the end of the second bar here, um, if one was sight reading without this sense of structural understanding, you would get to this point and then look at the right hand and realize, oh, I've got to go finding that note. Where the heck is that on the keyboard? And then you'd play the next three notes, and then you'd have to look down at the left hand. Oh, where did that go? And then you've got to go and find that. And there would be all of this confusion about finding your way through the piece. But once you understand these structures and patterns, it's just a vastly simplified experience.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful example of being able to synthesize very rapidly. Uh, and here, the introduction of the dotted quarter and eighth, and that this doesn't just happen, it's been prepared. So again, in reading, you don't have to stop and figure that out. You've already been there. We'll talk about how we got there in just a few moments.
Right, and I'm going to play the beginning of this twice, and in the context of it, Paul, answer a question that has come up.
Okay.
And that question is, well, can we hear it without the accompaniment? And the answer is yes. And part of the question was, is the articulation actually recorded? It was a little hard to hear with the backing tracks. And yes, you will
Yeah.
these notes here.
Uh, just a word about that. Uh, there's a part of me, George, that almost wishes that the backing track does not. The backing track comes in automatically when you bring in the file, and in order to remove it, you have to go to that icon at the bottom right, the speaker icon, and darken it. Uh, and I always start without the backing track because I want to just start with the clear sound of the example and only add the backing track when we reach a certain tempo. So a protocol, and this is very carefully outlined in the protocol, which, do you want to mention that protocol or did you already, George?
Why don't you talk about it? And I'm going to put a document into our chat area that you can download. Go ahead.
It's, I think, so important to understand that good sight reading, an experienced reader can synthesize right away, understands the notes, understands the rhythm, doesn't have to calculate them. Uh, the inexperienced reader needs to do pre-reading uh, before attempting to read. So the pre-reading would be identifying the pitches, the identifying the key, uh, working out the any rhythm issues, working out any coordination issues. Now you can see here there are very few coordination issues, but measure 3 does have one issue where you have to play the left hand on beat 1 and the right hand comes in on beat 2. So you definitely would want to investigate that at the lesson. Uh, but I actually designed a protocol of the steps that I feel uh, are desirable in preparation for the actual reading experience. When you're reading, you're actually tapping into many learned experiences to be a fluent reader, and I think that sometimes is not really clearly understood. And very often the reader will just plunge in willy-nilly and not get the rhythm right, or read in a very episodic, spasmodic way. And the great value of SuperScore is that you can set it at a very slow tempo, you can separate the hands, and so that the student is learning how to make these decisions in real time, but many of the decisions are already made, and you're just recapturing them. So again, if you think in terms of brain function, your brain is kind of uh, drawing on learned experiences. That's really what it seems to boil down to a large extent.
So this document that outlines Paul's structured way of introducing pieces and taking advantage of the technologies at different stages in that process is in the PDF that I've put into the chat area that you can download. And if you are seeing this video later and want to send an email to either of us, we'll be happy to send it to you. This might be a good moment, Paul, for me just to give a quick overview of the interactive resources that are in this environment, because the question that was asked really kind of raises a question here of, are there aspects of this program and the technology that are being imposed on your learning process, or do you have a lot of choices that you can make? And yes, you have choices. As we've just shown, you can turn off the accompaniments. You can go up to the parts menu and you can separately mute any of the backing tracks if you wish. You can separately mute the playback of one hand or another if you wish. Paul had mentioned the concept of being able to slow down the tempo. Another option that you have, which I'll just illustrate quickly right here, is I'll just turn off the backing tracks but turn on a metronome. And if you do that at a little slower speed here, you can hear where that second beat comes in that dotted rhythm. And learn how to place your note in between. So you do have a variety of resources here, which then you engage in some kind of intelligent manner based on where you are in the learning of the piece. If you have a MIDI keyboard and you're at home, and I do think that the technology, when used by students at home, is where it really shines, because they're getting feedback through the playback of the music, through the visualization of the moving cursor, and even from a MIDI keyboard if they have one. If you go into the learning mode, you'll find out that the music is going to stop and wait for you to play the right note. And if you just want to go through without the backing tracks, just very slowly, just check, make sure, am I actually reading the pitches correctly? You can get that kind of feedback.
I would like to just pick up on what Carol Griffith mentioned. This will certainly, she writes, warrant another watch. Will a replay be available? Actually, we're attempting to cram. I imagine some of you may be feeling a little overwhelmed, and you're having the right feeling because this is an extremely rich environment with many facets having to do with using the technology, getting to know the library, and and understanding how many pedagogical techniques are available. It really is a I wish we could offer a course of study, and in fact we might be considering doing that again, because this is really considering all of the issues, huge, and we have an enormous amount of material that we would love to show you. So maybe you've gotten an idea of music pathways as a sort of core, but we have other materials which also are highly organized, and I think maybe we can go point by point, starting with point number one, which is uh, uh, the identifying uh, different elements like notes, scales, chords. So let us show you a few of the ways in which we focus on identifying elements.
Okay, so this is
So,
from
yeah,
a series called Folk Songs from Planet Earth. And this is a 9 level series of folk tunes, which means they're very tuneful, singable. You relate to them very easily. But Paul has assembled them in a very structured, leveled manner. And at each level, it's very clear the kinds of issues that are going on. Um, Paul, could we just skip to level 6? One,
sure.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is an example from that level. Um, Level 6 focuses on pieces with 8 as the bottom number in the time signature. This happens to be in 3/8, but most of them are 6/8 or 9/8. And to be feeling the dotted quarter as the beat is something that you get repeatedly throughout the series.
Yeah. So the every piece in this level six is in 6/8 time. In level five, every piece has a dotted quarter and eighth. In level four, every piece has a quarter, eighth, and so you know immediately what level to turn to. Level seven, each piece has 16th and eighth notes. So right away you have a tremendously valuable resource with about 20 or 25 examples emphasizing the same thing. So here you can see you've reached a point where you're reading in the key of E, but in a very limited sense still, because your right hand is using only the pentascale of E major, and the left hand uses just the fifth with an added note. So again, the amount of information that you need to cover in the lesson would be limited. And fortunately, you've been through this experience. When I teach uh, this, I will also make sure that the students practicing E major scale that week and doing maybe some chord progressions in the key of E major. Uh, so it's a lot of information, but it's very condensed and very methodical.
Paul, shall we move ahead to something from classics outside the box?
Sure.
So this is
I think we have time to do one or two more from folk songs. Maybe if you could go to number level seven with the 16ths and eighths.
okay.
And there you see a very clear example of eighth notes, 16th notes, and eighth notes, 16ths combined. Can we hear just a little bit of it? And it's a very exotic sound. Right. Now, I was teaching this piece to an adult student who happens to be from Malaysia and whose English is a little uh, compromised. She speaks very fluently, but uh, she had what uh, I like to use words for 16 note groups. A favorite of mine is huckleberry, huckleberry. George likes radiator, radiator, because it puts the emphasis on the first syllable. But she was having trouble with huckleberry, and so I asked her to give me a Malaysian word with 4 syllables, and then she did much better. But while we did this, at the same time, we went to uh, we went to music pathways level C with kite, uh, and I knew exactly where to go because I know in level C where they introduce 16th notes. Uh, do you have, can you access that readily, George?
Uh,
I think it's something with kites in it.
oh, back in music pathways.
Yes, level C. So there you see in the key of D major a similar kind of rhythm to get additional experience. And then we went to foundations, which we'll talk about in a moment, where I have rhythm examples, and there are rhythm examples in music pathways. Can you bring up one of those in a hurry, George?
Uh,
So the more you know your material, and of course that takes a bit of getting to know, it's wonderful to be able to, so there are throughout pathways examples of tapping and counting with backing tracks uh, that make that, just explore it and develop it in many different ways.
and so again, to just reiterate, one of our central points here is that you want to develop this vocabulary of rhythm. So we've got a vocabulary of finger coordination of patterns for pentascales, scales, chord shapes, to have a vocabulary of rhythms that are in your hands as well. And we've been talking now about uh, examples here with sixteenths.
Right. The materials that we've developed in Cyber Conservatory are all very carefully calculated to include not only musical beauty but and musical interest, but very focused pedagogy to and the tools of the Classroom Maestro and SuperScore are just invaluable in in bringing these elements to life in a very vivid way.
So what
But let me
to go to?
go ahead. Do you want to go on to the classic series?
Okay, so we have a series of 6 levels called Classics Outside the Box. And these are traditional classical pieces with which you're probably familiar. Um, in the interest of time, Paul, you're going to need to just cherry pick from the list here.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
where would you like me to go?
Oh, well, why don't you go to, uh, well, level 2 uh, is a beautiful example of, it's a little advanced for level 2 actually, because ideally the student should have played extended position chords, as you see illustrated in the first measures. Uh, and in the left hand, uh, in measure 5, you have a good example of a first inversion C chord, and uh, so working through. But the also the example gives the student a chance to really feel what it feels like to play in a Baroque style with an accompaniment that has a kind of Baroque feeling. You want to play a little of it, George? So you can see how rich this environment is. The first part of the environment is the help that it enables you to have in learning it, taking out the backing track, slowing it down, separating the parts, tapping the rhythms. Uh, so the learning of it becomes very, very colorful, actually. But then the final result, the ability to play it as a little concerto, is a tremendous reward. So, this is, you don't, if you just have the music, you're deprived of all of these possibilities. With SuperScore, it just and gives you such a much richer environment for the learning and the performing. And this is a dazzling piece to play with the accompaniment in a recital. Let's take a look at one other example, maybe from level 7. Uh, or the little prankster, for example. And here you can see the rhythm is rather complicated. This is level 7, so you'd be able to match this with what the student has learned in this would be like the last chapter of a method book probably, but it has a wonderful sound, and I'm quite. And you can see how each one of these could tie into one of the levels from the neuroscience. Now, along with these structured, these are in a category called structured materials because every level has a certain structures. But apart from this, we have a vast library of I would categorize these as fun materials, but they are very valuable for sight reading. Let's look at a couple of them. So, for example, let's look at foundations just for a moment, George.
Okay. And as I'm queuing this up, I'd like to address apparent frustration that's taking place in the chat. I don't know why this takes place through Zoom. I've uploaded several times into the chat this PDF. Many people are saying that they don't see it. Somebody else has said that they've clicked on it, which meant they did see it, but it's not downloading for them. I don't know why that's happening, but I will be sending out early next week an email to everybody who's registered for this event, directing them to where you can watch a replay. And in that email, I will put in a link to the document that I will guarantee it will be downloadable. So I apologize for the frustration that's taking place. Oh, and I'm glad to see that for Colleen, the download actually worked. So it may be that it just takes a while to get from here through the Zoom server back to where you are. Paul, what would you like to show in Foundations?
Uh, in Foundations, just very quickly, Foundations has activities, we call them challenges. I co-authored this with a very dear, wonderful colleague, Phyllis Lehrer, and together we came up with these structures, and we present the structures in a very logical way. So, for example, I think we have um, the triad inversions.
Sure.
Anything. Yeah, yeah. It's so important to be able to find an inversion without having to go to the root position. Very often, you ask a student to play a chord in a first or second inversion, and they have to go to the first inversion to find it. And so this is an example of a challenge where you have to find the root on top, build the fourth below, complete the chord. Uh, and we do this. If you can do C, you can do F, you can do G, you can do G flat because they're all one color. So that makes a module. And teaching in a modular way is a wonderful way to, but there's also music involved because we have a backing track. So it becomes a kind of a fun thing. Can you just play a little of this, George? exactly right. Uh, and then I would go to modules. In modules, there is a piece for every major scale spanning one octave. There's a piece for chords in different configurations. For example, there's a piece for only C, F, and G because they only use white keys. So it drums in this idea of a modular approach to learning theory in the context of a musical example. We have time maybe for one example.
Uh,
Uh,
well, Paul, what I would like to do is to talk about what um, the way in which you've brilliantly structured this series, because in this series you're talking always about the layout of musical materials, intervals, scales, and chords based on the juxtaposition of white keys and black keys. And so we were just talking about chords here a moment ago, and one of the things that's very clear in these pieces from modules, and you've diagrammed this out very, very nicely, is that in the case of chords, there are four of them that are all one color, meaning in this case all white key or all black keys. And then we've got the groups that are two white keys with a black in the middle.
and it spells ADE or lemonade. So if you can spell lemonade, you find those chords. Can I just make it? I see we've run out of time. I want to make a concluding remark.
Okay.
I hope you're feeling, as I am, frustrated that there's so much this information, uh, and I certainly would be very, very happy. Uh, George and I, would be very happy to continue this vein. I often say there is a learning curve to this whole course, and that there are three parts to the learning curve. Learning how to use the technology, which is easy. That's the easiest part. Learning what's in the library and how to navigate it, that's not so easy. There's an enormous amount of material, and it's beautifully supported, the enormous support from one thing to another, but it takes getting to know. And the third part, which is also challenging, is the pedagogy of learning how to use these materials with the technology in the most effective way possible. So if you're feeling frustrated, you're having the right feeling, because we can't in one webinar begin to really go into the depth that's necessary to really explore all of these facets. But I hope that this has given you at least an idea that there is a very, very rich environment to be explored. George, you have concluding remarks?
Yeah, I think we'll conclude by playing a bit of one piece here by Lynn Freeman Olson. It's a Carl Fisher publication for which you wrote some wonderful backing tracks. And to sort of reiterate the concepts here, when we consider that we all learn from a multiplicity of perspectives. We're learning through the physicality of doing something over and over again, creating automatic responses in our playing system, our mechanical system. We learn through our eyes by what we see and how we interpret on the screen. We learn through our ears. And one of the important things here with SuperScore has been that we are learning to connect what we see with what we hear at all times, because the music at any moment can come to life and be played. We also learn to listen critically and to learn rhythmic structures, kind of like a student, or like all human beings learn language, which initially is an experience of just constantly listening to people talking to us, and we imitate, and we start to develop a vocabulary. And so here we have a piece now that is one of these very impressive recital pieces. It's not as hard as one might think if you've gone through the process of developing this vocabulary, in this case of rhythms, eighths versus quarters, um, and that you have been able to identify hand positions very carefully and have developed a vocabulary of reading chord structures on the staff. You're going to see a lot of first inversion chords here. And putting it all together, this is a rather fun piece, which would love to use as a concluding piece, and then we'll take a few questions.
And by the way, the collection is filled with these gems. It's really, it's available in hard copy, and the pieces do stand very well alone. But I'm very proud of my backing tracks. Sure to bring down the house. It would give me no end of pleasure if we got a lot of complaints about how this was the most frustrating webinar you've ever seen because there's so much material and we couldn't begin to cover all of it in the 1 hour. So do complain to us and it will be music to our ears.
So, a question has come up in the Q&A area. Does SuperScore update automatically? And I believe what will happen is when an update becomes available, if you're running an older version of the program, you will get a message on the screen saying an update is available, and it's your choice as to whether to update. However, if you're on an older iPad that was able to run an earlier version and we release a newer version, if that version is not compatible with your iPad, then you will not get that message because it'll be a little frustrating, I think. SuperScore does support all iPads running iOS 13 or later.
Uh, John, that was from Piano Favorites by Lynn Freeman Olson, published by Carl Fisher, and it is in print.
And another question here, what is the preferred device to use? And he says he's got a PC and an iPad. Well, the materials we've been showing today are for the iPad, SuperScore specifically. The illustrating app that we use for music theory concepts, Classroom Maestro, that is an app for Mac and PC. If you don't have an iPad but you have access to MIDI files and the MIDI backing tracks for a lot of these albums that are available in print are available, you could, of course, use them in Home Concert Extreme on the Mac PC as an alternative. So if there are any other questions, we would be happy to address any, particularly if they come up in the Q&A. It's a little easier to follow, but I'll also look back through the chat here. Once again, I apologize that many of you were not able to download what I consider to be a simple PDF. Not that it's your mistake or anything, that somehow this system should have made that very easy. It's a very shareable type of document. But I will provide a link to it when I send out an email next week on the replay of this webinar. Well, seeing no further questions, Paul, what I think I am going to do.
I will give you all the message that I always give my students at the end of a lesson. I really enjoyed the hour that I spent with you. And what a pleasure it was to be able to spend time together.
Absolutely. And I will put up on the screen the email addresses uh, that you're welcome to contact either one of us, and we look forward to it. Uh,
Yes, I would be greatly delighted to hear from any and all of you.
okay, well, thank you so much for these wonderful comments that we're seeing coming up here in the chat. And at this point, I think we'll adjourn and we'll look forward to seeing you again in cyberspace.
Bye, everybody.